So let's delve in. So a little bit about the agenda. We're going to have three main sections. Firstly, I'm going to talk about basic avalanche theory. I'm going to move on a bit to how to think about tour planning. And lastly, discuss a little bit about avalanche rescue. And as Jacob described, and then we'll have a Q&A session. So the first thing I want to start with is that avalanches are dangerous. As recreational users, the mountains are dangerous to us because we choose to travel in the terrain. And about 90% of all avalanche victims triggered the fatal avalanche themselves. So what I want to say with that is that accidents occur as a direct result of our actions, regardless if we're blissfully ignorant of the dangers or well informed but simply made a mistake or were unlucky. But with that said, I believe we can reduce our exposure by educating ourselves, which you're all doing here today. We can plan our skiing based on weather conditions and avalanche conditions, and we should always bring the appropriate safety equipment and being well trained in how we use it. And with that said, let's jump into the learning. So, basic avalanche theory. Snow science and the mechanics behind avalanches are utterly complex, with people spending their whole lives researching and trying to better understand the mechanics and how avalanches actually behave, or snow, how it behaves. So, in this section, I will discuss the general types of avalanches, avalanche problems, and how they relate to the avalanche forecast. I will not focus on different types of snowflakes and how they form, which is a super important part of snow science. But to expand on that, we would require a lot of additional time. So, types of avalanches. We can categorize avalanches into three general categories based on their release mechanism, i.e. how the avalanches starts. So we have the three types. We have loose snow avalanche, a gliding avalanche, and slab avalanche. So we're going to look at them in a bit more detail, starting with loose snow avalanches. So loose snow avalanches start from a single point of triggering, so we can see it here, and fan out as they plummet downhill and sweep along more and more snow. So we get this triangle shape. This type of avalanche often occurs directly or during or directly after snowfall, or when significant warming occurs. So we get warmer temperatures and then heats up the snow. And these kind of loose snow avalanches are often released naturally, meaning that we don't necessarily, or most of the times, we don't need a skier or someone to trigger the avalanche, even if that obviously can occur as well. And approximately 2% of avalanche fatalities are attributed to them. Many of these deaths are the result of people being pushed off the mountain rather than being buried. So to the second type of avalanche is the gliding avalanche. These avalanches are also almost always released naturally when the friction at the interface with the ground becomes moist, and this makes the snowpack slide. So we can see that the entire snowpack is released. And this can only occur on smooth surfaces, such as grass, which we see here, or smooth rock slabs. And the steeper the slope is, the more likely the snow is to slide. We can often see these kind of glide cracks or fish mouths or frowny faces. These are common precursors to glide avalanches. And because the release of glide avalanches are very, very hard to predict, it's best to avoid traveling underneath these glide cracks. And now we come to slab avalanches, and this is what we will focus on, and this is what any kind of avalanche course will focus on. And approximately 98% of all avalanche casualties relate to slab avalanches. So let's look a bit more in detail what a slab avalanche is and why they occur. So for a slab avalanche to occur, we need 4 essential ingredients. We need unfavorable layering, an initiation, and we need propagation, and we need a slope steepness above 30 degrees. So what do I mean with these four things? Well, unfavorable layering. We need a slab on top of a weak layer. A slab is well-bonded snow, mostly consisting of small and round degraded crystal shapes that bond well to each other. So it is, you can call it hard snow. In contrast, the weak layer mostly consists of large snow grains. These large grains are weak and break easily. So the weak layer, like the name says, is weak and the slab is hard. Then secondly, we need an initiation. An initiation occurs when the load applied to the weak snow layer exceeds its strength. This causes the weak layer to fail. This process can happen naturally, such as when the weak layer breaks under the weight of accumulated snow during, for example, heavy snowfall. Alternatively, it can be human triggered, such as when a skier exerts additional stress on the snowpack. In general, the snowpack stability is better maintained under gradual increase in load. Sudden changes like heavy snowfall or a skier exerting multiple times their body weight on the snow are more likely to destabilize the weak layer and trigger an avalanche. The third ingredient we need is crack propagation. The initial crack in the weak layer needs to spread out across the slope. Simplified, if the weak layer is present across the entire slope and the slab is sufficiently thick with well-bonded snow, it might support crack propagation. So the initial crack can spread out in all directions. And the last ingredient that we need is slope steepness. The slab will only slip if the slope steepness is above 30 degrees. So we can have all three other categories, but if we don't have 30 degrees, we won't have an avalanche sliding down the mountain. The ideal slope angle for an avalanche, meaning that avalanche is less or more likely to occur, is between 35 and 40 degrees, with a peak around 38, 39 degrees. So that is the ideal angle for an avalanche to trigger. So all else equal, the slope angle plays a significant role in the probability of triggering an avalanche. So, looking at my kind of crude drawings, we can see the layering, we hard slab, weak layer, and then additional snow underneath. So what happens? If we assume a skier comes and put load on the slab, and that's enough to initiate a crack in the weak layer, and the crack propagates. We can see it a little bit as the weak layer being crushed, and then this slab falling down these few centimeters or millimeters that the weak layer is, and then it starts sliding downhill. So you can see here how this slab almost drops and then starts sliding. So how large are these avalanches on average? Well, the average ski-triggered slab avalanche has a fracture thickness of 45 to 50 degrees. So that means that the slab is on average 45 to 50 centimeters. And the width is usually, or on average, 50 to 70 meters wide. And when I mean the width, I mean the distance from here to here. And then the path, the length is 3 times as long. So that is from the start here, which is called the crown, this wall where the slab was released from, until the avalanche stops with all its debris. So we're talking about a large amount of snow moving. Okay, so now we have looked at the 3 types of avalanches by release mechanism. Now we're going to look at the 5 avalanche problems. The avalanche problems help us understand and communicate the nature of avalanche hazards, each problem describing distinct characteristics of avalanche behavior, its triggers, and ultimately appropriate strategies for mitigation. And as is the standard, I will focus on the first 4, as gliding avalanches are referred to as a secondary problem to skiers, as they're almost impossible to trigger by a human. However, their danger should not be underestimated. So let's start with the first avalanche problem. So new snow. I mean, new snow is why we want to ski, because we get this new snow, fluffy, that creates good powder skiing. But it's also an avalanche problem. So the new snow problem is related to the new or most recent snowfall. The spatial distribution, which is a fancy name for where is the problem on the mountain. Well, new snow is generally widely present and found on all aspects, because if it snows, it will snow in usually all aspects. So, north, south, west, and east. And it will snow at all altitudes above freezing. So we talked about that we need a weak layer for a slab avalanche to occur. So where do we find the weak layer when it comes to new snow problems? Well, they usually found at the transition between the old snow. So we can imagine this light blue is the snow that was there before the snowfall, and then darker blue is the new snow that falls. So we tend to find the weak layer at this interface, because the new snow does not bond well with the old. However, we can also find the weak layer within the new snow. This can be caused by, for example, it being quite cold in the beginning of the snowfall. The snow is very fluffy and light, and then it becomes warmer as it snows, and the snow becomes heavier and dense. So we have a relatively weaker layer than the top. So I talked about that new snow can be a problem. So how much new snow is actually a problem? Well, new snow adds additional weight to the existing snowpack and its potential weak layer. And the amount of new snow the existing snowpack can support depends on several factors. And we can categorize these factors into unfavorable or favorable. If we have pretty much only unfavorable, and it's enough with 10, 20 centimeters for us to have concerns. But if we have very favorable factors, 30, 50 centimeters of snow is required before we can increase our avalanche danger to a 3, for example. So what are unfavorable factors? Well, strong winds, we're going to talk about shortly. Cold temperatures. Cold temperature means that the snow is fluffy and doesn't usually bond as well with the old snow. We can have a smooth and loose old snow surface. This is a perfect new weak layer. We can have new snow denser towards the top, like I described, because of temperature differences. We can have a generally unfavorable snowpack, so that we have very weak layers in the snowpack that are easily triggered. And then the favorable factors, very much the opposite. We have no to light wind. We have temperatures just below freezing, so the new snow bonds better to the old. Rain that turns into snow, similar effect. And the old snow surface having small scale irregularities. So that refers to, or that happens because the terrain is frequently traveled. So we have a lot of skiers creating old track and roughening of the surface. Or we can have a generally favorable snowpack with no existing weak layers, or weak layers that require a lot of load to trigger. We move on to the second avalanche problem, which is wind drifted snow. So this is related to snow transported with the wind, with or without concurrent snowfall. So it can exaggerate the effect of new snow, or it can just exist even though it hasn't snowed for a long time. And this is often referred to as the mother of all avalanche problems, because wind can transport snow at a much faster rate than snow falling from the sky. So we can add a lot of new snow to a specific place without it actually snowing. So the spatial distribution, it is highly variable, because it only, wind comes from a certain direction. Terrain features will cause the wind to move in a certain direction. So we tend to find wind slabs on leeward sides of terrain features. These terrain features can be gullies, bowl, or just near distinct changes in the slope angle behind ridge lines or other wind-sheltered locations. And it's more common above the tree line because how the wind blows. And once again, the weak layer tends to be found at the transition to the old snow surface, but it can also be found within the wind slab, and that's usually a result of changing wind directions or changing the speed of the wind. Moving on to the third avalanche problem, we have persistent weak layer. So this is related to some persistent weak layers within the old snowpack. These layers often consist of buried surface ore, depth ore, or faceted crystals. I won't go into details about these, but most people are familiar with surface ore, maybe not by the name, but these are those shiny, delicate crystals that form on the snow surface after a cold and clear night. Very common, especially for northern Sweden. They're very large, and you can really see them in the morning when the sun starts shining. Then we have depth ore and faceted crystals, which on the other hand develop within the snowpack due to temperature gradients, so differences in temperatures within the snowpack. So without going into more detail, how they form and why, what they all have in common is their ability to create ideal weak layers because of these large crystal shapes, which can persist in the snowpack for a long time without disappearing. So where do we find it? Well, it may occur on all aspects, but it's more commonly on shady, wind-sheltered slopes due to how they are formed. But they can be widespread, so the entire slope can be covered in the problem, or it might be highly localized, for example, behind a large tree or a boulder because the wind has not been blowing there. And the weak layers can be found anywhere in this old snowpack, often buried quite deeply, but it depends on the type of weak layer we have. Moving on to the fourth problem, we have wet snow slab avalanches, which is caused by the weakening and failure of the pre-existing weak layers in the snowpack due to the presence of water. And rain, for example, can also act as an additional load on the weak layers. So the distribution, or where you find the problem, depends on the cause. So when sun is the main cause of the liquidation of the snowpack, the distribution is often mostly depending on the aspect, so in which weather direction the slope is and the elevation. So for example, south-facing slopes might have more of that problem, and lower altitudes because it's warmer. But if we have rain, all aspects are affected of that. And the weak layer we can find anywhere in the snowpack. So now we have looked at the different types of avalanches. We looked at the avalanche problem. So we're a good way into starting to understand how avalanche occurs and what we look at when we look at avalanche danger ratings and the forecast. So the avalanche danger rating is a 5-scale rating where we start on 1 and the highest level is 5. So I know it's a lot of text, but I'm going to read out at least part of it and put a bit of emphasis on certain aspects. So we have number 1, which is referred to as general stable conditions. Here, triggering is generally possible only from high additional loads in isolated areas of very steep or extreme steep terrain. So here, 35 degrees and above usually. Then we move up to level 2, which is already referred to as heightened avalanche conditions on specific terrain features. So here, triggering is possible primarily from high additional loads, particularly on the indicated steep slopes, so steep slopes being about 30, and we're going to talk about what indicated slopes are. Then we have number 3, which is dangerous avalanche conditions. Here, triggering is possible even from low additional loads, particularly on the indicated steep slopes. And then we move on to 4, very dangerous avalanche conditions. Triggering is even likely from low additional loads on many steep slopes. And then 5 were extraordinary avalanche conditions. And this is more a natural catastrophe kind of avalanche rating. So how do we understand the avalanche danger rating? Well, the scale is not linear, but rather increases exponentially. And why is that? Well, it's because the avalanche danger rating takes into account multiple factors. The first being snowpack stability, and therefore the additional load required to trigger an avalanche. So when the rating goes up, the load required to trigger an avalanche decreases. It also considers the frequency of avalanche-prone locations. In other words, when the danger rating is higher, there are more places where avalanches can release naturally or be triggered. So if you think about a minefield, there are more mines to step on. Then also with avalanche rating, avalanche sizes increases. So when we take these three factors together, it's a bit more easy to understand why the increase in danger is exponential and not linear. So now I have a question to you. At what avalanche danger level do you think most people die? And I'm going to give you a little bit of time to think about it. And give you the answer quite quickly here. But so if we look at these numbers, we see this left column is the number or the ratio of days in which the different ratings are forecasted. And the right column is the fatality ratio. So what is the share of people that die at the different ratings? So we can see that approximately 50% of all avalanche victims are killed at a number 3. But I think what is really important to understand is that 30% of people, 1/3 of the people who do not return home, do it on a number 2. And why do I want to point this out? Well, it's because you quite often hear, well, it's only a 2. Or you also hear a lot, it's only a 3, so it's safe. The scale is from 1 to 5, but the majority of the days is 2 and 3. I mean, 80% of the days is a 2 or 3. So it's very easy to ignore the actual dangers of these level 2s and 3s. I mean, if a 3 occurs 30% of the days, every third day is a danger rating 3. So I mean, I don't think I've ever skied backcountry on a 4, and 5 very, very rarely occurs. I've never seen it. So what I want to say with that is that the real avalanche scale for us recreational users is compressed to these 3 stages. So 3, should ring alarm bells, and 2 is still avalanche terrain. And we can see people die on number 1 as well. So this is not to scare, but it's just to make sure that people understand that 3 is serious or dangerous avalanche conditions as it is stated. So now we've kind of learned about all the ingredients required to understand the avalanche bulletin. So the avalanche bulletin is the avalanche forecast that gives the information about the next day's conditions. So this is for Switzerland. You can find it at the Swiss Avalanche Institute on the website White Risk, or using their app White Risk. So I mean, and if you go elsewhere, you can Google, and if you go to White Risk, you can also find the different countries' avalanche bulletin. I would say that the Swiss one, not being a bit biased, is fantastically well done in many ways. So the first thing you obviously need to know is, where am I? And you need to find the avalanche bulletin for where you actually are at the moment. In Switzerland, you get this nice map, and you can zoom in and you can go, to super detailed 1 to 10,000 map. So you can really be sure that you get the forecast for your region. So I've selected my region, which was Engelberg last week, when we had a large amount of new snow falling. So the first thing you see is the danger rating. In Switzerland, they have added a plus and a minus, and an equal sign, to get more precision into the forecast. So we were 3+, so meaning bordering reading to a 4. And then this kind of star sign looking, or a compass. These black fields, which are all of them now, show the aspects at which this rating is relevant to. So this time, at all slopes did we have a 3+. And then this mountain with a filled-in bar shows at which altitudes the rating is relevant. So here we had a danger rating of 3+ on all elevations above 2,600 meters. It can also indicate for below. So for example, when we have wet snow problem, we might have below 1,500 meter, this problem is relevant. Then we see what kind of avalanche problem we have. Well, we had new snow, which corresponds to us having a problem in all aspects. So for what we learned previously. And then they also give you a description of the problem. As a consequence of new snow and strong to force westerly wind, sometimes large wind slabs will form. So even though they have not mentioned wind slab as a specific problem, they mention it in the text. So it's very important to actually read the text as well. And they also describe how avalanches can in isolated cases be triggered in near ground layers and reach large sizes. So the text really gives more information, and they tend to have, especially in circumstances where you have a lot of snow and nice blue sky weather like we had on a weekend, to give some additional warning that it requires experience to judge. You also have additional info in the bulletin. They describe the snowpack, which is very relevant for you to understand where are the weak layers present, at what angles do I need to look out for certain things. So if you're a bit more experienced, want to learn more, I think it's hugely helpful to actually read the snowpack description as well. And then they give you an outlook, how they think the conditions will change within the coming days. This gives you an opportunity if you're planning something for the weekend, by Wednesday, you can start to create an idea what is going to occur. And it's very recommended, if you're planning a tour, to read up on the snow, on the avalanche bulletin beforehand, so you have an understanding of how the snow has changed before you actually arrive somewhere. And I mean, the outlook, if you're going on a multi-day tour, it can be nice to understand how these experts think the conditions will change, maybe for the better or for the worse. And with that, we have discussed the basic avalanche theory. There's obviously a lot more to learn. And I can understand that the basic can feel quite overwhelming when you're new to it. But with that, you've gotten quite a good understanding of the basics, what is required to understand a bulletin, and also a bit how you do tour planning. And I mean, I think the harder I practice, the luckier I get. Planning is a super essential part of successful tours, and as a guide, we spend a lot of time planning. Sometimes it feels like I plan almost as much as I'm out in the mountains. But in this section, I'll walk you through how you can think when planning a tour, maybe a ski tour. I mean, we're going to make an example of a ski tour, but you can use it also for free ride touring, or whatever you're interested in. And the process that I will describe is obviously similar to what I use when I'm guiding or out with friends, but it is very much the condensed version of it for simplicity. And for the fact that we're not out in the mountains, and I can't show you everything that I would do if you were actually out practicing this in the field. And when I go through this, I will not provide all the answers, partly because we're not out on a real tour, but mainly because I think this is very much an exercise in asking the right type of questions. And then with experience, you will be better and better at actually answering these questions. So we're going to look at a little made-up scenario where a group of 4 friends want to do a ski tour of approximately, say, 1,000 meters of ascent and descent. So when planning a tour, it is very useful to follow a structure. Here I'm going to use a 3x3 framework, which is a very commonly used tool in the Alps, where we look at 3 different factors: condition, terrain, and people. And we do that over 3 different levels. So we have trip planning, which happens before we get to the mountain at home. We have local evaluation, which happens when we get to the mountain and move on the mountain. And then we have individual slope, which is when we do the assessment for a particular slope of particular interest. And when I discuss this, it will feel very much like I start with conditions, move on to terrain, and then people. But all these 3 factors happen together, because you can't decide on the terrain if you don't know the people, if you don't know the conditions. So these, you go back and forth between here all the time, or they happen simultaneously. So let's start with trip planning and looking at the conditions. So what do you actually need to look at? Well, we need to look at the avalanche bulletin, which we studied, and you need to look at the weather forecast. So these factors will decide what kind of tour is feasible. I mean, if we have storm weather and very high avalanche danger, maybe we don't want to go outside. We need to look at the time of the day and the season. Where can we actually move depending on the weather? Do we have enough daylight? Will it be too warm in the afternoon? We can receive information from personal reports. So as a guide, I tend to call colleagues and get information. Maybe they've been there recently and have really fresh information. I mean, you can receive information from social media. There's a lot of information on social media. Obviously, you need to be able to trust the information. But trying to collect as much possible of the conditions before you actually go out in the mountains or you start planning your tour. So you might have to look at a wide area to actually find a suitable terrain to move in. But for this scenario, we're going to assume that we have a avalanche danger level 2+. We have a new snow problems on all aspects above 1500 meters. And the text also describes that we might have a potential issues with wind slab, particularly on, that should say western slopes, actually, sorry. So western aspects. And then we have weather forecast. Well, we have clear blue sky for the whole day. And the past days weather have been light snowfall and light to moderate wind. So this explains very much why we have the avalanche problem that we have with new snow problem and some potential issues with wind slab on western aspects. So when we want to plan a tour, we look at a map. This can be a paper printed map, or it can be, online tools. I tend to use, or digital tools. I tend to use digital tool for much of my planning at home because it provides a lot of features that you cannot just do on a paper map, but it all depends on preference. Naturally, on the field, you will also bring a paper map. You can refer to ski touring guidebooks and ski touring maps to get more information. So we can assume our 4 friends have done a pretty good homework. They have found this green, nice looking line that goes up these couloir. And these colors is one of many features that you can add on these digital tools. It is the slope angle. So it indicates how steep the slope is. And as we learned previously, the slope angle is very important. It helps us understand the avalanche, what is avalanche terrain. So we can see that this, let's call it plan A. Well, you can see that it's pretty much 30 to 35 degrees with some oranges. And using an online tool, I can see that it averaged 34, 35 degrees for this entire slope. They've also looked at alternatives. Maybe they can follow this red-white line and follow less steep, which almost completely avoids avalanche terrain. Maybe ski down the same or ski down a bit and then go up the blue and then ski down this nice ridge line. So they've looked at different alternatives. And based on that, they can start identifying cruxes. And what are cruxes? Well, cruxes in climbing is the hardest section, and in skiing we can refer to them as the key points of the route or the terrain that is of particular interest, which is often these avalanche slopes or slopes that are steep enough for avalanches to occur. So we can use a method to assess these cruxes called graphical reduction method. It is developed by the Swiss Avalanche Institute, and it considers 2 factors. It considers the slope angle and the avalanche danger rating. So we take this from the avalanche forecast, and this tool is available online or on the White Risk app. You can actually slide these up and down and see how it moves. So I put mine at 2+, very close to the 3, and I put the slope angle at 35 degrees. And then we can see that this white circle has moved into this orange region. So This tool, it gives us the rough assessment of the avalanche triggering probability. So based on that, what does these colors mean? So the green, yes, I can share the website later. We can provide probably that in an email or something like that. So the green is referred to as slight danger. The definition is generally safe if no warning signs are present. That does not mean that avalanche cannot occur. There's always residual risk. We have the red areas, which is high danger. Travel in avalanche terrain is not recommended. And then we have this interesting gray zone or orange zone, which is referred to as elevated hazard or danger, and a caution with exclamation mark, as it is written in the model. So what does this mean? Well, it means that experience is required. You need to be able to make a detailed assessment in the field if you should go or not. You need to have defensive behavior when approaching it. So it means that you shouldn't push your luck, to use very kind of basic language. And you need to consider how to reduce the risk by risk reduction methods and measures, which we'll discuss. And as it's defined, and as I would state, inexperienced riders should avoid this area. And experienced riders will avoid these areas as well. So you need training and experience to travel in this terrain. You need experience and training to travel in all kinds of avalanche terrain, but from the point of this model, we need to really consider it. So what does this mean? They've gotten this area, orange area, for their trip planning. So what does this mean for our group of people? So we need to consider who is coming along. How many people are we in our group? What are the participants' wishes, skills, and experiences? As a guide, we ultimately want to provide a service where our clients have a fantastic day out in the mountains. So we need to align our expectations. That's super important, and we need to consider the skill set. But I think, just when you're out with the friends, that's also very important. Expectation management is a super essential part. I think no matter if you're in the office and doing collaborative work, or if you're out in the mountains and doing collaborative work. But that can be tricky. Our made-up group of 4, I think what I will describes a very common group of friends. The group has past experience of ski tours, but their skills and motivation vary. We can assume that 2 persons in the group are very keen to ski steep terrain. One person wants a nice uphill and some fun skiing, and one person is nervous about his fitness and skiing level. So here we have 4 friends who have different expectations, different skill sets, and we really need to consider how this might cause problems in the trip planning. Maybe that's why they draw up different routes. Maybe this were the 2 people keen to ski steep. This was the persons who were just wanted a bit more mellow a day. So how do you incorporate that into your plan? And here I think you just need to decide within the group how you're gonna solve that, but it's something you really need to consider, and how you solve it will depend on the group. So now we move to the second level, so local evaluation. Now we are on the mountain. This starts as soon as we step out of the train, the car, or out of our house here in Engelberg, and we start to see the slope. So we're moving away from reading forecast, getting secondary information, to actually seeing and feeling for ourselves. So what do? Well, we look for warning signs. What are these warning signs? Well, the best indicator of avalanche problem is other avalanches. So if I see an avalanche right on the slope that I wanted to ski, that's a good reason not to go up there. But it can also be seeing avalanches on the same type of elevation, the same type of aspect. So we're looking for these warning signs. And we also try to compare the current avalanche observation situation, what we are observing ourselves in the field, and with what we can see or have read from the bulletin. So we try to see if the forecast matches reality. And we do the same for weather. and visibility. If we can't see, it becomes a lot more tricky. I would be very hesitant to walk up a slope that I don't know without, or I don't know the conditions without seeing, because seeing is very important in making avalanche decision. So, I mean, the parking is somewhere down here. At the beginning of this tour, you walk on a path almost through the forest for snowshoes as well. You walk through the forest and immediately you start observing. You look at the slope, you get higher up, you start looking into these steeper sections. What do we see? Do we see other skiers? What happened when they ski? So it's just trying to collect as much information as possible from everything we can observe. And we can talk about the terrain. Well, here, view into cruxes. Can we actually see these crux passages before we get close to them? What are our critical areas? What are our route choice and possible alternatives? Can we see existing tracks? And I mean, I want to look at things, and I want to definitely look at relevant things. So our group, when they did the planning, they were very observant and noticed this yellow little region. It's a steep slope above 35 degrees, pretty much 20 vertical meters. And it's quite similar to this section. It's a similar aspect, and it is of similar slope angle. So when I am out in terrain, before walking up on these crux passes, I try to look for similar terrain as close as possible to the main cracks, but with lower consequences or more easily accessible. How you can, you can refer to them as test slopes. How you can assess these test slopes depends on your skill level. There are many ways which you can test them, which are a bit beyond the scope of this lecture. But I mean, maybe you're just so lucky and see someone else cross what you would refer to ski across test slope. So they already see, you can see from how the snow behaves when they ski across it and make a judgment from that. So if the test slope appears safe, does that mean that the real slope is safe? Well, not necessarily, but these test slopes provide information. And if I was worried about the test slope, I would be very worried about the big crux slope. So I use these test slopes, which are similar to the real crux slopes, to gather information. And I mean, what are the big differences between this slope and this slope when it comes to our avalanche problems? Well, I would be more concerned about this slope having wind slaps high up if this snow has been blowing over the ridge line here. And I mean, how you assess this all comes down to your experience level and the group, but always useful to look for similar slopes to get a sense of the real slopes. And I mean, these test slopes, or, the test slope here was very luckily close to the point where the two routes kind of divert. So this could be a good decision point if we feel like, no, we're not comfortable with this, so we're not comfortable with this. Well, then we're going to do plan B. So we can directly go out to plan B. But when it comes to people and these test slopes, so you plan out a tour, identify these test slopes or these key decision points. And I don't only make decisions, based on what I see, but you also need to make this decision based on how people are feeling. What are the physical and mental state of the group? Are we feeling more tired than we expected? Maybe someone was nervous and didn't sleep as well. That will affect what you do. Is the timeline still realistic? Were you stuck in traffic? Did you, whatever reason, are we not moving as fast as we planned? Who else is there? Do we see hundreds of people skiing the same thing as us? Maybe we don't want to go there. Because when we think about people, we cannot only just think of our group, we need to think of the bigger picture. We need to evaluate the whole mountain. And then the group dynamic, are we still friends? So when you make these decision points, I think it's a good place to also, do a round circle and actually ask people how they're feeling. How you then in the end make a decision. You need to decide within the group. It can be as simple as everyone gives a thumbs up or a thumbs down if they want to, how they feel. But make sure that you actually listen to everyone in the group, because if we have a group like ours, the people who are keen to ski steep are more likely to be very, yeah, let's go. And the person who's a bit more nervous is maybe more likely to stay quiet. So, I mean, I'm not going to make any judgment if the group continues or not, but let's say that they do, so we can follow this kind of framework forward. Now we come to the individual slope. So now we move away from looking at the whole mountain, but now we look at the specific slope that we're interested in. It can be from below, like in our case, we need to walk this up to then ski it down, or it can be from above, skiing it down. So once again, we need to assess the avalanche problem. This requires skills and experience. We need to think about how severe the problem is. Do we have visibility again? Can we see it? How frequently travel? I'm going to touch upon why this is relevant in a few slides. And we need to consider other dangers such as glaciers, cornices, which are these overhanging slabs of snow, which can fall down upon us or fall down and cause a slab avalanche from the additional load. So we need to think about all these conditions before deciding to go up on the slope or not. We need to look at the terrain, and here I want to discuss the risk as the probability of triggering an avalanche times the consequence if an avalanche actually releases. And for that, we're going to use an additional framework, once again developed by the Swiss Avalanche Institute, and I've recreated here and made it slightly simpler, but it's still very much the same model. So we look at the two factors. We have probability of triggering. The first thing we do is use what we found out during our planning stage using the graphical reduction method. Where were we actually? Well, in our case, we were somewhere in the orange. We look for warning signs. Have we seen any warning signs such as past avalanches or recent avalanches? Well, if we're in widespread, we very much move out to the right. If we have rare, well, we're still in this orange-red region because we don't want warning signs, because that means that the avalanche danger is high. We look for existing tracks or frequently traveled terrain. And with these, if we kind of always take the least favorable, but what the existing tracks does is it pushes us a little bit to the left. If we have tracks, we can say that the probability of triggering is slightly less, so we can move ourselves in the leftward direction. And then we end up deciding where we are. I mean, I'm going to say we're somewhere in this orange region. And when you're out in the field, it's quite useful to play with thumbs. Obviously, how you kind of place your thumb exactly, it depends on, it's a bit like when the doctor asks you how much pain are you in. But with time, you learn to calibrate your scale quite well. So we are on the orange mid for the probability of triggering. Then we can look at the consequences. So what happens if an avalanche actually releases? The first thing we look at is how big is the slope above me? And why do we care about that? Well, if an avalanche occurs, we want as much snow to be below us rather than above us, because snow above us is more likely to end up on top of us. And we don't want to, if we are buried, we want to be buried as close as possible to the surface. I mean, in our case, looking at the map, I would say that we're somewhere here. We easily have, 70, 80 meters of proper avalanche terrain above us. So we're in quite this like orange, if we're generous, we're in like this orange sideway thumb. We need to consider what is below me. Do we have terrain traps? Terrain traps are, for example, cliffs that we could be pushed over. Gullies or almost like a hole in the ground where if we're pushed into the hole and then all the snow collects on top of us. So we once again buried much deeper. Or are there trees or boulders that we can hit? And this is not to be underestimated. Unfortunately, even the smallest of tree can cause serious injury or death. So this is why, if we have terrain trap, the consequences are very large. Or on the opposite, do we have a smooth run out? Does the slope become less steep with time? So the avalanche path can be longer and we're less likely to be buried as deep or hurt. So in this case, I would say from the terrain, just looking at the map, that we're quite smooth run out. However, we're still in this region because of the slope size above us. We look at are several persons affected. If an avalanche occurs, preferably want no one to be caught, but we definitely do not want everyone or multiple people to be caught, because we need people for rescue, and it's a lot more time consuming to rescue multiple people compared to one. So how can we make sure, does the terrain allow us to make sure that only one person is exposed at a time? I mean, we're walking up a gully, a narrow shape in the mountain, and this is very hard to say just from the map. This is something that we would have to assess when we're actually there. But I mean, once again, I would say that we're somewhere in the orange. Let's say that we're generous towards ourselves and makes it easy for this, that we are 2 orange thumbs. So this is kind of the rough risk check. We got in 2 orange thumbs, simplified. This we can then provide more detail. I mean, this you can almost do in your planning stage, just looking at the map. You get a view of it. Then you need more detailed assessment in the actual field, which is especially for the probability of triggering. You need to make an analysis of, is there a weak layer? How likely is it to propagate? How thick is the slab? How does that affect things? How does this slope look? Is it a homogeneous slope, or is it convex? And all these affect the probability and potentially consequences of an avalanche release. So this takes a lot of time. This requires experience. You need to be out in the field and learn from someone, or learn together to actually be able to judge it on the field. So that's why that's the additional step to this rough risk check for cruxes. But this already gives you quite a good understanding of the consequence or the risk of the slope. But looking a bit, what does these thumbs mean? Well, assuming we actually got these 2 orange thumbs, even though we were more in the high region on both of them, but we end up in this with 2 orange thumbs, we end up at this question mark. And these pictures are directly from the Swiss Avalanche Institute and where they present this model. So I mean, the question mark says that a detailed assessment is necessary, just like I discussed. You need more information to be able to make a sound judgment. And you need to consider, I would say, risk reduction methods to continue, which we'll discuss on the next slide. And I mean, the crosses very much not recommended. When you have these like exclamation marks, so you have slight or small of something and large, maybe the terrain is okay, but when you make this, you always need to consider, how certain am I of my assessment, especially when we move in this region. Because if I'm slightly off in my misjudgment, I think the probability of triggering is low, but the consequences are large. Maybe I'm okay with that risk, but if I'm slightly off, I very quickly move into a risk that maybe you're not comfortable or should not be comfortable with. So how can we reduce our risk? I mean, these are some general pointers of what you can do. You can talk about route selection. We can seek out the flattest part of the slope. As I said, slope angle is very much, the steeper it is, up to pretty much 40 degrees, the more likely you are to trigger an avalanche, everything else equal. In our case, we look at the couloir, this steep. It's very hard to find anything flatter than what we're walking on. So here it's very hard to make, you can do maybe macro adjustments, but overall quite tricky. We prefer convex terrain, so for example, the ridges over planar or concave slopes, because evidence have proven that planar and concave slopes are more likely to trigger an avalanche. So we can stay within already tracked areas. I've talked about this quite a lot, tracked area. So why is that? Well, it's because 90% of avalanches are released by the first skier on the slope. So if someone else has skied it, it does not mean that it's a safe avalanche slope. There are many cases where the slope avalanches on the 10th or 20th skier, but the first skier is at a disadvantage. So I mean, you can always say there's always someone more eager to ski the slope. Let them ski it first. Or you can hire a guide who will always ski the slope first, for many reasons. What are other factors? Well, we talk about the load, light load, heavy load. You can avoid, to some extent, heavy loading. What are heavy loadings? Well, falling, jumping, gathering in large group. But I would be very, conservative with trying to reduce the danger by, not falling. That happens. So I think, maybe not something to fully count on, but avoid heavy loading is one way. We can avoid fresh wind drifted snow. So we can avoid these wind slabs. With a bit of experience, if you don't have snow on top of them, you can visually observe them. You can also feel them when you walk on them, but by that time it might be too late. And I mean, in this case, we talked about potential wind slabs. If you walk up here, at what point do they occur? And when I step up on them or notice them, or they're buried under a little bit of fresh snow, maybe it's too late. So that can be, it can be easy or it can be tricky to observe them. We can avoid terrain traps, as I said. We can choose terrain where we don't have terrain traps, and we can find these islands of safety. Make sure that we only ski with exposure 1 at a time, or skin up, or we can spread out to try to avoid the probability of multiple people being caught at once. So, how you assess these cruxes, we've gotten these 2 sideways thumbs, or maybe even a sideways thumb and a thumb partly down. So we're quite in a high risk territory. How you use that information is obviously very personal. It will depend on the group, the people, their mental state. Are they feeling, optimistic or whatever? But I think the very important thing here is to make sure that you're at least very clear on how or why you're acting. Am I acting because the facts says that it's okay, or am I acting and going for it because I really want to ski it? I tend to tell myself, if my gut feeling says that I shouldn't be there, that's a very good reason not to be there. But if I am super keen to ski and all the facts are proving the other way, I definitely not going to ski it. So this you need to communicate. And we are here at the slope, once again, the round table, discuss what people are thinking, make sure that everyone has the same risk tolerance, or at least, happy with the decision. Because it is a decision you make as a group to continue or not, or should be a decision of the group, because you are exposing the entire group to the potential risk. So, now we walked past, or I've discussed these 9 different factors. If these made up 4 people would have continued or not, that's hard to say. I think I would have been I'm not sure if I would have walked up the slope with information that we have today. Inexperienced riders, I hope, would not have walked up to this slope without very clear evidence that they could. I think it's always better to be a little bit. It's better to turn around once too often than push it once too often. That will make you have many good ski days. But it always depends. Now we haven't seen the field. Sometimes, things can seem very bad when you read the forecast or when you walk up, but when you get closer, the picture might be very different. But this requires experience and, good decision making. And if it feels complex, obviously you can always go with a guide. And I talk about this as a group. When you are guiding, you obviously have a bit more, or you have a leadership position and you make the ultimate decision. But I think it's very helpful, and I enjoy incorporating my clients into the decision making if they want, because it's a way for them to learn. Make sound decisions. And with that said, we're going to move into the final section. Maybe our 4 friends were not so lucky, or they were a bit aggressive in their behavior and pushed on when they shouldn't. So their avalanche rescue skills will be tested. I'm not going to explain everything in details in this section, just like I haven't explained everything in detail in the previous sections, because this requires a lot of practice in the field and just reading the manual to your transceiver, which you should do. I really recommend reading the manual for the transceiver. You actually get a lot of instructions, but I want to mention a few things. I'm walking through the procedure that might not be in every manual and might not be easily accessible. I've been fortunate to train with the world expert in the field, Manuel Ganschwein, who pretty much, what he says in terms of avalanche rescue becomes the standard for all organized rescue and all mountain guide education. And I will assume everyone has used a transceiver before. If not, it will be a little bit trickier to follow. This statement, when time is your enemy, speed is your friend, I think there are a few places where this is more true. In an avalanche scenario, you have about 10 minutes to rescue the buried person to give them a good chance of survival. So, you need to be fast and you need to know what you're doing. So, first of all, safety equipment. What should you bring? The bare minimum is an avalanche transceiver. It should be a modern one, which has a triple antenna. You should bring a probe and you should bring a shovel. This should be a certified shovel. It should not be a cheap aluminum shovel. It should definitely not be a plastic shovel that was unfortunately sold as avalanche shovels in the past. In most cases, avalanche debris will be as hard as concrete, and a cheap or a bad shovel will not do the job, and you will increase the rescue time significantly. So a good shovel. I recommend people ski with an avalanche airbag. I ski probably 98% of my days, regardless if it's free riding, single day ski touring in Norway, or multi-day ski traverses in the Alps. I bring an avalanche airbag. I think the potential benefits are easily makes up for the additional kilos on my bag or on my back. I wear a helmet, always skiing, and I tend to wear it a lot ski touring as well when I'm in avalanche terrain, because if something happens, I want to reduce the consequences by having my head protected even going uphill. Bring a first aid kit. I think it's quite a good idea to have a bivy bag, some kind of shelter where you can protect an injured person or yourself from the weather until rescue arrives, which is easily accessible usually in the Alps, but not in bad weather, and very far away, for example, in northern Sweden. It's a very light thing that can make a huge difference. There are a few documented cases in the Alps where people would be alive today if they'd carry these 100 to 200 grams. An in-reach device, you need to consider if you actually will have mobile service to call for help. If you're in doubt, it's good to have some kind of communication device. The modern iPhones nowadays, you can actually call for rescue through the GPS network. However, your phone is not as good with cold. You use it to photograph, so it's not a redundant system. But the three main key things: you cannot go skiing in the backcountry without an avalanche transceiver, a probe, and a shovel. So we're going to walk through a scenario where we have one victim and multiple rescuer. That is the most common way, especially when free riding. And we, as I said, we want to avoid multiple buried people. If we have multiple buried people, the complexity increases a lot, and we've done additional errors. So we're going to talk about this simple and most common case. So, what are things to do when an avalanche occurs? Well, the victim should try to escape it, potentially skiing out of the slab. This is not something that you can count on. Avalanches are very powerful. So I would pull my avalanche rucksack to give me that potential advantage. Rescuers should try to keep visual contact with the avalanche victim as long as possible. This will help them find, when you have a visual, the last visual point, you know where to start looking for them with your transceiver. When the avalanche stops, or when you need to also observe if you can actually see the person. That's the first thing before you do a transceiver search. Quickly look, can I see them? Not everyone is buried. But when the searching starts, it's very important or very useful if someone takes a leadership role naturally, and they will give the instructions: take out your transceiver. We're going to count to 3, and on 3 we're going to switch our transceiver from send mode to search mode. So we're going to count down 1, 2, or count up 1, 2, 3, switch. And why do we do this all together? Well, this is a stressful situation. It's very easy for us to just go away searching and someone forgetting to switch their transceiver. So that basically means that everyone else will be searching for a person above the snow and not below the snow. So when we make this switch together, if we notice that our transceiver says, victim is 3 meters away, we know that someone has switched. So it is this check to make sure that we're all in the right mode. When you do the search, if you have heated gloves, like battery heated gloves, they need to be removed. You cannot use a transceiver with a heated glove around your hand. Your transceiver will not work. Modern transceivers will hopefully give you a warning. On a Mammoth one, for example, a mobile phone with a cross will give you an indicator, but you need to remove those. And electronics should preferably be switched off. So there are 4 stages to the search. You have signal search, coarse search, fine search, and pinpointing, and then you will do the digging. So the signal search is not always the case that we need it, but signal search occurs before the transceiver finds a signal and you get a distant reading. So if this is the case, you will hold your transceiver next to your ear and listen for the beeps, the double beeps that come when you find a signal. And why do you hold it to your ear? Well, when you're multiple people, it's a good way if I look around to see that everyone has it close to the ear, then I know that everyone is in signal search. Here's about covering as much ground as possible, as fast as possible. If you are alone, you will have to zigzag the field. If you're multiple people, you can divide the field into even search widths. When you get a signal, the first person that gets it will scream signal. And this is once again to make sure that the whole group is well informed. When you get the signal, you will get distant readings on your screen. You will follow the directional reading. So here are these red dots. You will follow it with still quite high speed. And then when you come to 10, you will once again scream out, this time 10. This gives information to the rest of the group that we're getting close. With the case of only one bird person, this is an indication that the other people can divert from their search path and come closer to the person that has the distant reading of 10. At 10, we can start to slow down somewhat and more accurately follow the directional reading on the screens. Then when we get to 3, we scream out fine search. At this point, if we still have our skis, which in most cases we'll take the skis off. We will go closer to the ground and we will be very sure to not rotate the transceiver in our hand, because if we rotate the transceiver in our hand, the distance, the directional readings will become off. And the rest of the people in fine search, they can start to prepare for the next stages, which will be probing and digging. So they can coordinate by taking out one probe and their shovels. And here, you can give clear demands. You take probe, I take out shovel. Clear and short communication to ensure that it's well-organized rescue. So the person with their transceiver will continue and very carefully, slowly follow the indication readings on their transceiver. And they will come in here. They will have, for example, a distant reading of 2.9. It will come into 1.8. Then you get to 2.3. So the distance reading has increased, which means that we're going in the wrong direction. We go back to the point where we had our lowest reading. Maybe you need to mark in the snow to remember it. Modern transceivers, like the Mammoth Barry Box, they help you on the way. So they show you how you should move. But you need to practice this to actually move with the transceiver, because if you a little bit shortcut it, it will take longer with that indications. We go to left, for example, while the reading increases again. We go back 1.8, 1.6, 1.1, 1.5. Okay, well, we are off. So we go back 1.4, we go down 1, 1.3, 1. Okay, we have found our lowest reading. And we have done so while making sure that we do not rotate the transceiver. We need to keep it steady and directional. So now we come to pinpointing. At the lowest distant point, you will mark the snow as best as you can to make sure that you don't lose it. But since we're multiple persons and we are organized, as soon as we have that reading, you can ask for the probe, and you start probing at the lowest distant reading. So in this case, this is where we would have received the 1. So you'll put the probe in there, and we always probe 90 degrees to the slope. And when we probe, we do it in this squared spiral. Back not that long ago, it was recommended to do it in a round spiral, but the reason why we do it in squared spiral is because it's a lot easier to make sure you keep an even search distance between the probes, because we can always just increase by 1 dot. So we do that until we get a probe hit. So we actually feel the person in the snow with our probe. When you practice that and you get to feel how a human usually, I mean, you can press a button and it will be hard. You will feel the soft touch of a human, but also, I mean, the probe goes in 2 meters and suddenly it only goes in 1 meter. Well, you know that with almost all certainty you're probing at the person. So when we have identified the buried person with the probe, we will start the digging. So at this point, I mean, everyone's shovel except the person with the transceiver who should already have their shovel out. We will quickly line up. We start at the probe, which is left in the snow, and we keep a shovel length between us, and we line up like this. And we dig something called conveyor belt, where we cut in the snow. The first person cuts the snow facing the people behind them, and you can very easily cut hard snow with this if you have a proper shovel. And we don't lift the snow, we transport it back. So the first person will cut, the second person will transport it away, and if there's nothing to transport back, that person will also cut steps. So the first person will usually have the hardest work because they are moving the biggest blocks backward. They will decide when to rotate because this is really, really hard to dig. If you are not tasting a bit of blood in your mouth, you are not probably digging fast or hard enough. And when you train, you dig like it matters. You need to practice to dig like it actually matters, because otherwise you are not going to dig effectively and efficiently if it ever occurs. Hopefully not. But the first person will scream rotate, and then you switch one position. So the second person comes first. And I mean, you can do this, aim for every 2 to 4 minutes. Obviously, we lose a bit of time if we rotate too often, but if we're tired, we're not going to dig as effectively. So when we get the first contact, 2 persons will come to the front. Preferably, you will shorten your shovel, and you will start to create more working space around the victim. And I mean, we're aiming for the mouth and the chest, so to make sure that the bird victim can start breathing as fast as possible, or we can start CPR as fast as possible. Naturally, when you come really close, you cannot dig as aggressively as you just did, because you can seriously injure the person. And studies show that also most of the post-traumatic stress for buried people come when the avalanche people are close. But yeah, you will try to identify the head and the chest, and as soon as you can find the head, if they're not breathing, we should give rescue breath. We need to obviously make sure that they don't have snow in their mouth, otherwise it's going to be hard to breathe regardless. But we will give rescue breath, and if required, we will immediately start CPR. And at this point is the place where, if it's not done, we need to consider rescue. In the Alps, we have very good rescue services to actually transport the person away. Even if the person is well, I would feel better to make sure that they visit a hospital to make sure, even if they're breathing fine, that they don't have internal trauma. Yeah, so I mean, I was talking pretty much there 13, 14 minutes. So that's already longer than the ideal case to rescue a person who's buried. So what I want to say with that is you don't have a lot of time, but with practice, you get a lot faster. people tend to be okay at practicing transceiver search. They tend to do that. People tend to be very lazy at practicing digging, and very lazy at digging properly, because it is hard work. But that's definitely where you can save a lot of time in the rescue procedure. Yeah, so that was it from my side. And now we are going to move into the question section.